Hi polymaths, almost doctors, and all those science nerds out there, and welcome to Schrodinger's Bathtub with me, Polymathic Jen, and my wonderful co-host Matt, who is actually almost a doctor.
Hopefully,
yeah. This week we're going to be talking about evolution and responses to it from young Earth creationists, and for that we have our very, very special guest, Jaded Atheist. Hi Jade, how are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Yeah, pretty good.
I'm doing all right considering that we can't leave the house here for the moment.
Oh, that's right. You're in lockdown.
At least for another month.
See,
yeah, it's pretty strict, and our numbers are not really going down at the moment, so we'll see what happens.
See, you're a victim of evolution.
Unfortunately, yes. Because COVID evolves just like everything else.
Yes.
And in fact, if people had looked at the science of RNA viruses, they'd know they mutate much faster than most. So their evolution rate is going to be fairly high compared to what we would expect.
Which is why we needed to be more vigilant. Even in a country which has been reasonably vigilant, it hasn't been enough. So around the world, we needed to be, as a race, it needed to be more vigilant and needed to be more proactive, especially once we got the vaccines.
I mean, look, if the rest of the world had been as vigilant as Australia had, or at least had done as well as Australia had, all things considered, then we probably wouldn't have been in the problem where evolution was a problem for us. But
yeah.
Like we're getting a couple. We had 210 cases today, and these are some of our highest numbers we've ever had. So, yeah, probably not too bad. But it is the Delta strain, which is worrying.
The US and the UK and other countries was gave the virus this enormous petri dish to evolve in.
Yeah, the United States.
Here's a big sample size. Go for it, virus.
Oh, well, at least the virus is happy.
Yeah, well. Do viruses feel emotions?
I think, Jen, for this show, what you need to do is make make the actual slogan for this show. You better hope there's intelligent life somewhere up in space. Because there's bugger all down here on Earth.
Definitely.
Because that's come up a couple of times, and I'm thinking about it again already, and we're only a couple of minutes, or we're not even a couple of minutes in. So we'll see how that goes.
So we're going to hopefully give you some facts tonight. And this is just me having fun at the moment, because I rarely get a chance to do these because I always forget. Thank you to everybody in the audience out there. We see you. Harmonica Man Sandy, Critical Cripple, Ring. Hey guys, you're freaking awesome. Anyone who's lurking at the moment, yay. Anyone who's watching later, you are absolutely amazing too. But yeah, maybe we should actually get into what we're actually here to talk about, which is basically talking evolution and talking back against the young Earth scientists.
The giant
ones
for the most part.
Hi, Claire.
Although on that, I do want to make a point first, and this is a serious point before. Well, I imagine there'll be lots of serious points tonight, but in amongst some maybe lighter points and maybe some fun points. But one of the ones I do want to start with is that I do not equivocate science with bad science with religion. In that sense, we are just making fun of the young Earth creationists. Some of the best scientists I have personally worked with
definitely
have been incredibly religious.
And most Christians are not young Earthers. They're not evolutionary deniers. They accept that evolution happened. They accept that the universe is old and the Earth is old, and that. But
yeah,
young Earth
I was just going to say that if I make that mistake tonight and I call, I make some fun of religious people, I am not making fun of religion in general. It is just that brand of young Earth creationism that is so pseudo-scientific that it makes every fiber of my scientific being quake in agony. So
I know how you feel. Now, on that note,
I think that would be a lot of
Jade.
But again, it's not the people; it's the idea and the leaders. And I will make that clear. That I only ever have problems with that. the ideas and the leaders, because
Yeah.
I think if you're a leader or someone who's presenting pseudoscience, you have a responsibility to check what you're saying and at least be careful about how you word things. You can be wrong. We all have the right to be wrong.
Oh,
But you
and
do
it's
not
good
have
to
the
be
right
wrong.
to say stuff or to misrepresent stuff without proper due diligence. Exactly what level that is, I wish I knew, but hopefully that's clear.
A lot of
Sorry, I just
scientists
wanted to
don't
get
know
that out
what
of the
that
way.
is, to be fair.
What was the quote? If young Earth creationists knew how to fact check, there would be no young Earth creationists.
Yeah.
Is that the quote I've heard before?
That is probably extremely accurate.
Oh, you have a friend in the chat, Matt.
Have I got?
Ted.
Oh, I don't recognize. Is it Ted? One of mine? Let me see.
I don't know.
I didn't actually
He
link
called you
this
a
one
dynamic
with my
thinker,
usual ones.
so-
I am going to link tomorrow's debate that I'm doing on hereticals about flat Earth with a lot of my friends. I want to
Yeah,
overwhelm
so you
the
have to
chat
deal with some young Earthers
Aussie
again,
people.
probably.
He is probably going to be a young Earther,
Yes.
but look, I'm looking forward to it, and I want to take, as I mentioned on last night's pre-show, although there probably weren't too many people there, that I do want to take a different note to that. I'm going to try and do it with observations that I have either in part or entirely made myself throughout my scientific career, so that I had, well, if you can call it a career, at least my scientific education. It's probably a better way of putting it, now that the words come to me, so that hopefully if someone says, well, how do you know? It's like, well, I did it myself. Here is the picture, or here are the facts. Here's the measurements. I think I know how it's going to go after that point. But again, I'm there for everybody else. I'm hopefully going to educate people, make it interesting, as we're also here to do tonight. Sorry, I have done a lot of talking already, and it's not even my show.
Well, you are co-host, so that's fine, Matt. You're here for the talking. But I was going to say, Jade was brought up as a young Earth creationist, so you are right there in the middle of it, Jade, and you know what this thing is where, I mean, we've had this as part of this discussion before, but that thing of that form of science denialism where if it's not in the Bible, it can't be real, so science must be wrong.
Yep. Yeah, I was taught from a very young age that science was inherently trying to disprove the Bible. That's all science was trying to do, and every scientist was trying to disprove God to deceive the world. So basically, it was don't ever look at what science has to say, only look at what the Bible has to say.
For me, that's all like that. Don't look at the other side, or the entire other side is all corrupt in some way, is always a red flag. But when you say all of science, Jade, was it just talking about all of scientists, or was it like a specific area? Did they just focus just the evolution, but you can listen to, say, maybe the astronomers on putting a probe on Mars, for example, or was it actually that broad for science?
So for the most part, it was that broad of science. Because like even doctors, we didn't trust. So if doctors put us on medication, my mom would try to find natural ways to take us off of it. I was on an antidepressant for a short period of time, and my mom encouraged me to take vitamin D and exercise and eat healthier, and then took me off of my medication, which did not do good for me. If we were prescribed anything, my mom would try to find the natural solution, and we did not go to the doctor for much. Anything that had to do with evolution or the beginning of the world, or how the world was created, we weren't supposed to listen to. But like physics and stuff like that, we could learn. Chemistry, I was allowed to learn a little bit, but I actually got interested in chemistry and I wanted to keep learning, and that scared my mom. So then it was no science whatsoever.
Oh.
That's nasty.
See, that's the bit I don't get with the Young Earth Creationism movement, is that yeah, they have to have a fear of science. Like, science is the devil lying to you. Where most Christians are like, no, science is good because it's given us all these things. It obviously works. That's the whole thing about science. It works.
Yeah. I used to be religious. I was nowhere near as far into it as Jade was, as most people in Australia aren't. But like that was, I never had a problem with science. Like despite having so many of the people around me being, well, when I was young, so many of the role models at least being religious in one way or another, none of them were, at least to my face, anti-scientific. Maybe that's an Australian thing, but and again, that is why I brought that thing up earlier. Is that a lot of, like, I have worked with, I would say it's less than the majority because just how the stats go in science, but a lot of the people I've worked with over the years in science have been religious, sometimes really deeply religious, like believe in like literal instantiation of angels at communion, sort of religious, but are some of the best scientists I've met, or at least really good scientists. And they had no problem. Like, I could sit down and talk to them. And so, like, it's such a disconnect when I hear, like, Jade talking about this absolute distrust for science in general. And so, from your experience then on that point, what was it that helped you break that wall, I guess, that was set up between you and science?
So it was actually finding out that I didn't have an accurate understanding of what evolution was. I was talking to my dad, and he had been an atheist for many years, and he was very interested in science, but I never wanted to listen to him. And so one night we finally decided to have a conversation about it, and I basically used the line, you know, we don't have half animals walking around, so evolution clearly isn't
the old
true.
crocodile one.
Yes. And my dad was like, oh, Jade, that's not quite how evolution works. I think that you need to look into this a little more. And I watched Ken Ham and Bill Nye debate, and it kind of helped me see that the arguments that Ken Ham was using didn't compare to what Bill Nye was saying and the evidence that Bill Nye had. And so even though I don't yet have a good understanding of evolution, I know that my understanding was not correct. And I started to realize that science, there's the scientific method is trustworthy, and science is not just trying to disprove the Bible. People are doing science just to understand the world because they're interested and they're fascinated by it. And it doesn't, for most people, it has absolutely nothing to do with the Bible.
100%. Most of the people I've worked with, I remember one of the people I did honors with, we had one or two discussions. We never got that far deep into it, although I'd love to, because it would be interesting, but we did kind of discuss briefly about the concept of God. We had very different views, but then we could turn around, we could do science together, and we would never disagree on the process, because I think that's the thing. When I hear a lot of young Earth creationists, and I think what Jade is saying is kind of alluding to it as well, the way science is depicted is more like a group of people who have an agenda rather than the process that science is. Because science isn't a thing as such. It's not an entity. It's just a method. It's a process by which we try and describe the world around us so that we can, and use that description, if you want to also drag a bit of engineering in there too, you can, to build or at least predict the future in a way that we can utilize. So computers, we know what's going to happen in the future if we do this, that, and the other with an electron, so that we can build circuit boards, we can use semiconductors, we can enlist the help of cathode ray tubes if you want the old TVs, or the pixels on the screen if you want to do LCDs, LEDs, OLEDs too, all that sort of stuff. So that seems to be something. So do you think then that just it was a matter then in general to that kind of community who's a bit more insulated, just saying, not necessarily to their face that they're wrong, but saying, actually, it's not quite, like, it's been misrepresented. We don't mean that. We're not out to do that? Do you think the most helpful, or maybe there's something else that
I think
more
that
useful?
is the most helpful, because it really is just a misunderstanding, and it's a misrepresentation of what science is and what science is trying to achieve. So I think that if you approach it that way, like, you yourself are not stupid for believing this, because I got a lot of that too. People would just tell me that I was stupid or naive, which immediately put up my guard. And so I wouldn't listen anymore.
Yeah.
It was instantly, okay, that's how you feel. You're wrong. My Bible's right. I'm no longer interested in what you have to say. So I think
I guess. Oh, sorry, interrupt.
Oh, no. So I think if you approach it that way, like, you're not stupid. I just think that you've been misinformed. Maybe not saying it that way, but, that idea. And then trying to explain where you were or where that person was misinformed could go a long way in helping people. I think that would have helped me. Did help me.
I found, obviously I haven't really had too much to do with the young earth creationist debate, but I have had a lot of the climate change denial debate, and I've noticed parallels not in the actual science or pseudoscience around it, but in terms of how things are presented. It's very similar in that no, all of the climate scientists have an agenda, or they're corrupted, or no, you can't trust anything that they're saying. And I don't know how close we can draw the parallels, but I've noticed some similarity. And I found, at least with the people I have discussed who've at least appear to have slightly changed their minds, it was not turning to them and saying, you're wrong. It was, I think somebody else has fed you wrong information, or something along those lines, because it's not about them. Because, yes, I can see the same thing when I was religious. If someone tried to just directly say, no, you're wrong, up comes that guard wall and you're done. But if you do it, you kind of go around it, be like, no, I'm not trying to attack the belief. I don't care. I just want to have a discussion around this little point. I think that's normally how it goes, or at least you palm it off the blame onto someone else. And I would agree that it generally is someone else. It's the leaders. It is the people who present it who I would say it's at fault, not necessarily just the followers.
Yeah, and the people that are presenting this information, you would have to deal with an entirely different way, because I feel like they know, or I don't know, maybe some of the preachers don't. But
so, at least some of them, but I know some of the leaders like Ken Ham, Bray Comfort. I know he's not always young. He has done a lot with young Earth, Kirk Cameron.
Because
now I'm thinking of the banana video. Yeah. They have been caught out so many times being dishonest in their editing or in their presentation of stuff that I can no longer. I will accept that they probably believe it to some degree, but there is no way they can't know that they've been dishonest with some of these things. I think Matt Powell's a great example of someone who is openly dishonest about it. Even if they believe some of it, those people I will hold accountable, because they should know better. But someone like you, when you're in there, I don't think of anyone in that as less of a person in any intellectual sense because they believe that. I said, I will only judge if you're in a position where you should know better or have been caught misrepresenting it. But that happens because that's human nature. As it doesn't, there's no difference when you're right and wrong in terms of how you feel about it. Otherwise, we'd know what was wrong all the time.
Exactly.
But we don't. Until someone presents you with the information and it actually sinks in, there's no difference in your brain when you're right or wrong. So,
which is, I think,
it's just interesting with
which is, I think, the problem in young Earth creationist circles is the reason they don't want you to hear the science. They want to paint scientists as the bad guys, and that is because they're afraid that when you do hear it, you will realize that you're actually being lied to.
Oh, absolutely. And so to counter that, we were always told that lie that the devil is deceitful and he's very good at what he does. And so he's using these scientists to deceive you. And something you said, Matt, I think it does correlate, because I also didn't believe in climate change. That was something that we also believed was not real.
Look, I'll admit that was me too for quite a while.
Yeah, but it was because we were told that there was this, government agent or group of people that were actively trying to disprove the Bible and deceive people. We were told that the government was trying to control us, and so it just helped feed, conspiracies and all of these things kind of tied together. And so I think it is easier when you're so fundamentally believing what the Bible says is true, and you believe that everyone who doesn't believe that the Bible is true is trying to deceive you. It's so easy to believe these things, and you can take that scarily far, unfortunately.
Yeah, I wish I knew what was had some silver bullet that would help us in that fight, but I don't think it is. I think it is a matter of just slowly trying to reach these people gently and calmly, acknowledging that they don't have to, being open, saying, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. All I want is for you to question your position, as you were free to do with me.
Yeah.
I can always be wrong.
It comes down to that thing of education, which is why they try to avoid it. Because if you have the education, then you can... you don't have to take everything that you... Well, this is why when you're in high school and you're doing science, you do experiments. Because you can't just... Reading it from a textbook is great, and you can memorize it, but there's nothing quite like the doing of it.
Yeah.
No
but I would never
simple
use
that
a
science
textbook
is.
as proof.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd never use a textbook as proof. The proof is in the experiments. Now, yes, we can't repeat them all, so we do need to rely on, or if you want to call it testimony, it's a special form of testimony, maybe, from someone else who's done these experiments. But you can verify, at least in my experience for the stuff I've done in physics, I have verified enough of it that I can tell it works. Because it's like X, Y, and Z, I have assumed that what they've said about those experiments is correct. However, it has to be correct if this following experiment I'm going to do works. So I don't need to test everything leading up to it, but I can test certain stage points. But I guess I'm lucky in that the sort of work I do is well beyond what most people would have the opportunity to do or the will to do. It's what I do is not for everyone. Clearly, it can't be. It's too niche.
But even so, just having a high school science education and doing the experiments that you do in high school and learning how that works and learning how the scientific method works, because you do learn that in high school. Kids do learn it.
Only test I ever got full marks in at high school for my HSC, so our final year for anyone in America. I forget what the tests are called there, but that final year was actually a physics practical.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
it's the only thing I ever got full marks. I actually lost 1 mark initially, and then I realized that there'd been a mistake in the way it was marked, so I had to go to the teacher and be like, can you fix this? You've just crossed where you shouldn't. If only I'd done so well in some of the other exams, but oh well. I did well enough. I got into what I want. I find it weird, though. I still have some people, because I do teach high school students for spectroscopy. I teach in chem, even though I'm not a chemist currently. I have a background in chemistry. I'm half a chemist anyway. Maybe not a full chemist, but I do teach, and I teach high school, and sometimes they'll ask me what my high school leaving mark was, and I'm just like, wait, what? I never thought about that I haven't thought about that in years.
It matters anyway.
It doesn't.
It's like you say, educated beyond your intelligence. It doesn't, but it doesn't actually matter. If you scraped by, or you got top marks, it doesn't matter if you're in what you want to be doing and you're doing well at it. You don't have to be brilliant. Yeah. You just have to do well and enjoy it and learn from it and discover new things. And that's all that matters.
I mean, that being said, biology was never something I did a lot of it. Well, I didn't do any of it at school beyond the basics, year 7 to 10 type stuff. So I never actually specifically studied biology. But to try and bring it back to what we're talking about today, I do like... sorry, I'm just looking at
The chat.
Yep. Oh, trust me, I finish enough things. I am a very patient man. I do not know where to go from here.
Sorry.
To try and bring it back, I do have a big interest in learning about the certain specifics of paleontology. Like, I like learning about how they found fossils, or like where they found them, or how they put the pieces together. Because to me, it's like a big Sherlock Holmes novel without Holmes fallacies in it. For all of the problems there for the two people, including Jen, that will get that reference. But I've always just found it really, really fascinating. Like, even since when I was little. So, like, one of my favorite documentary series of all time, and I imagine I'm going to get a lot of agreement in the chat, and I hope from Jen, although I'm guessing Jade probably hasn't seen it, Walking With series. So the Walking With Dinosaurs,
Walking with Dinosaurs
Beasts,
and Walking with Beasts, yeah.
And Monsters.
Oh, wow, I remember them.
Like, for its time, they were amazing. Now,
they
I
were.
know they had some... There are a few...
There were no
like,
feathers.
I can watch these now.
In the early ones,
the
anyway.
science.
The early Walking with Dinosaurs, there were no feathers. In the later versions, they fixed that and put the feathers on the ones that should have been feathered.
Yeah, and some of them even did have some hairs and spikes, because, again, it wasn't as well understood at the time.
Yeah.
But it's like, things like that are what, like, I really enjoy, but I'm guessing Jade probably has no idea what I'm talking about here.
No,
So,
I haven't.
I know I'm good at going off on tangents, but
That's fine.
considering that you do have both Jen and I here...
That's right. I'm letting you go for it tonight, Matt, because you're enjoying yourself.
Yeah, I will enjoy myself, and I will talk for hours on paleontology if you let me. So you probably shouldn't let me, because this show shouldn't run for multiple hours. But anyway, so
I was taken out of high school, and so I think that's another important part. Like, when you guys were talking about experiments and stuff, I haven't gotten to do a lot of science experiments. Besides, like, we've started buying little kits at home for my daughter to do, and I've been doing them with her. But
I bet you've enjoyed
and I want
that.
to start doing that more. Yeah.
But the thing from that is you get to see that science works. And that's the important thing of doing those experiments when you're young. Even if it's just simple things like learning about the water cycle and starting with some ice, melting it to water and evaporating it, and then condensing it again afterwards, learning that and showing that that's actually what happens, and that, even though these experiments were done centuries ago, these were how people learned to understand this. Getting a prism for the first time and splitting light yourself and knowing, oh, that's how a rainbow works. Well, more or less how a rainbow works. Yeah, it's the same principles. That's the point. So, learning these things and seeing the consistency in science, you can then extrapolate from that science is going to be fairly consistent even in the things that I can't repeat myself. Now, that doesn't mean it's always going to be right. If there's a new thing that's come out, if it hasn't been verified by other people, then it's a new study. And we need time for science to digest it, for other people to go and follow up experiments on it and delve deeper into it. If it's purely theoretical science, then we're at the point of, it's logically consistent with itself, but we need some way to test it, and that may come years down the track. There was a long time before the theoretical discovery of the Higgs boson and the actual discovery in the CERN super collider. But science shows that it works because we have these predictive tools in science. We can predict things in the math, in the physics of it all, and then later on through experimentation, once we get the technology to do the experiments, or we get the more powerful telescopes in space, etc., we can go and observe these things, and we go, our observations match what we think they should have been, and that's evidence that we were correct in our original hypothesis. And that leads us down the route of having theories, which is exactly what happened with Darwin. And now I've got a mental blank, and I looked this up before, so this wouldn't happen to me. Who was the other guy who basically came up with evolution at the same time as Darwin?
It's not Linnaeus. No, not Linnaeus.
No.
Huxley, is it?
Is it Huxley?
Or was the other guy?
No.
No. Sorry. I'm not good at names.
No,
but
I'm not either. That's the
Darwin
problem.
actually waited to publish because this guy
Yeah, because
came
they'd
up
actually
with evolution at
they'd
the same
actually
time, but
corresponded.
didn't quite have as much science behind him as Darwin.
Yeah, they'd actually
From what I've read
corresponded.
of Darwin, he was actually an amazing guy. He was
Wallace.
incredibly
Thank you,
nice
Jeff.
and progressive at the time.
Yes, it was Wallace.
Wallace,
Thank you, Jeff.
yes, that's it.
So
Yeah.
there were two scientists who were of the time, well, naturalists as they would have been called then, who at the time who were working on this and came basically to the same conclusions. They had different methodologies for how evolution worked, but they both saw that it worked. They both had examples in nature that they could refer to, and they both agreed that this happened.
From my understanding, Darwin more than Wallace in terms
Yes.
of having examples.
But Wallace did have examples.
Yes.
There was a set of birds that he'd observed in Asia somewhere that had given him the clues to what was going on. I know that Darwin's was also about birds as well, because he saw the difference in the birds between islands.
Yes, but also, like, I've read... I couldn't get through all of it. It was just too dry for me, unfortunately. I have read part of On the Origin of Species, and he dedicates an entire chapter, and I have read this chapter, to the domestication of the pigeon. Because it's such a good example of evolution.
It is.
But people, like, I would suggest for everyone in the chat, everyone watching, when you get a moment, go Google fancy pigeons, like specifically bred pigeons to look fancy. They're a funny looking creature. But it's a good example of selective breeding there. But he used those the entire chapter. Sorry, I know that's a tangent, but I had to bring that up. I just like that you had an entire chapter on... No, they're not sky rats. That's seagulls.
Seagulls, yeah.
Another thing we were told...
They are sometimes called flying rats, though. Flying rodents. Nerdy won't like that, but...
we were also told that, like, because science changes so often, or they have to... Really, they find out more or new information, but because science changes so much that they don't really know. So how can you be certain on anything science says when they don't really know?
See,
You don't,
thing.
but that's the point.
Yeah, because there are no... A theory in science is the best description and explanation for all the evidence we have for a certain subject in that sense, whether it's black holes, the start of the universe, or evolution. It is our best explanation. It contains all the facts that we know, because facts aren't as important as theories. Facts are below theories. And it contains all the evidence that we've collected as well to support that. But it itself is not the be-all and end-all. Theories have to be falsifiable. So there has to be a possibility that theory can be wrong, because it could be. And this is the thing that I guess a lot of them don't get, because your Bible, not your Bible anymore, Jay, but when it was your Bible is a solid non-changing, which is a lie anyway, but a non-changing thing, and it's the Word of God, and it never changes, and it's... But that's not true. It's been rewritten and interpreted so many times, it has changed. It has evolved itself. But they take it that it's unchanging, and therefore it's more solid a foundation than something that is open to being wrong. And that I find just erroneous in and of itself. You should always be open to be wrong. I love being wrong. I've said it a number of times, both on this show and when I did Stump Jen. Being wrong is brilliant because I learned something. I'm always open to being wrong.
It's not a nice feeling at first, but it does take a while to get used to it. But I would agree. And I don't quite say I love being wrong quite like as Jen has. My version is you can always be wrong. I've said that on pretty much every show I've been on where something like that has come up or where it's been relevant. You can be wrong about anything. Now, that doesn't mean that you can be wrong equally on everything. It just means that as the information... But before I ask Jade another question, relevant to the previous point. One of the things I find on this idea about, but science is always changing, I don't see it as, we're changing our minds. It's like honing in on accuracy. So it's like a target, and the first thing we've drawn a massive circle because we know it's in this vicinity, and then we slowly start shrinking that circle as we get further and further down into what the correct answer is. So it's like when people say going from, particularly for sometimes in the flat earth debate, but in general, a really good example is going from like Newtonian physics to Einsteinian physics of relativity, and when you get time dilation due to many different things, momentum dilation, because we're proper physicists here, Jen, not mass dilation, although it gives you the same results pretty much. But momentum is generally the one they go for the two people that are going to get what I'm talking about. But like going from that, Newtonian physics was not necessarily wrong. It's just Einsteinian physics, like the Einsteinian understanding of relativity, and beyond that, we've come a lot further than Einstein, even though we're still proving some of what he founded. We've got a better way of doing a lot of his maths. In fact, most people who would actually finish a course in general relativity at, say, an honours level or master's level or above would probably have a better understanding of the maths of relativity than Einstein did. Just because we've had that much longer to develop it, and it's
I remember
hard.
having an argument with a philosopher on Twitter about Isaac Newton, because they were trying to say that now that we have relativity, we shouldn't teach anything about Isaac Newton. No, let me finish. Anything about Isaac Newton to anybody, because he was a horrible person. And my answer to that was, him being a horrible person doesn't make him wrong. And that she said, no, but he is wrong because Einstein showed that he was wrong. I said, no. That's not how science works. Newton was right within the framework of the evidence he had. Einstein had more evidence and more mathematical tools and a couple of 100 years of scientific evolution, because it's a good word, where he was able to look at the bigger picture and come up with relativity, which is a better framework for how the universe works than Newtonian.
Sorry, I just saw the
model.
The
so
chat.
And this person blocked me. A so-called professor in philosophy blocked me because I said that.
God.
That's not the point. That's what I said. It's about accuracy. It's not about we changed our mind. We got more correct as such. It's we became more accurate. It's slowly developing. It's like saying I'm starting off with a shotgun and I'm standing 100 meters away from the target and I kind of hit in the right direction.
Yeah.
We're not saying that we hit the target perfectly, but then as we go on, we start developing, we get more accurate, we get to a rifle, then we start putting, telescopic sights on it, we get, maybe larger bullets so we do more damage, whatever you want to, analogy goes, probably flying out the window. I don't know my guns too well, beyond, like if you go beyond World War II, I don't know too much about guns. But it's about that accuracy, and so that's why at high school here, and I agree with this kind of method, we taught the ideas that are now defunct or have been replaced in modern physics, because you can't start with the current ideas. They're too hard. They're too complicated. So you start with the basics, because it's like, here's a general overview. This is what they thought. Then we start to develop it. And the story that goes with that is also really good for teaching people how science works. One of the examples they've had in the physics syllabus here is the development of our understanding of the atom. How it went from, kind of this idea of just a ball, tiny ball, to the plum pudding, to Bohr's model, through to, Rutherford Bohr, and then through to Schrodinger with a few steps in between. And although it's a bit confusing to some of the students I've had to try and teach it to, it is really useful because it shows through experimentation, it's not that they're always wrong, because you can make an argument that an atom is kind of like a ball, but it's like we developed, as the experiments came through, became more accurate. Yes, some things were proven wrong, that happens, but overall it was about trying to develop a model that had better predictive power, to go back to earlier, and also to bring this back to evolution. we've come a lot further than Einstein, but sorry, not Einstein, Darwin, and his predecessors.
Yeah,
but it's about developing accuracy and predictive power, because it's not useful in science if you cannot make predictions.
Yeah.
If you can't make predictions, you can't do anything with it. You're done.
There's a difference between when a scientist or when somebody who studies evolution says evolution, and a creationist says evolution, and it's not just about what they think evolution is because they're wrong. It's that they think that evolution started and stopped at Darwin. They don't realize that when we say evolution, we're not talking about what Darwin said. We are talking about all the stuff that came afterwards, all the research into DNA, everything we know, everything we know about evolution. Mutations, all the things we know about swapping of mental blank again.
Transmutation.
Thank you. where you actually have two pairs swapped within the DNA, so you get the
you can only
transmutation.
I know it's I think it's transmutation between things like bacteria, archaea, protozoa.
This is the point I'd like Mero here, because she'd correct me.
Yeah, I've done some chemistry on it, but I haven't formally studied.
Yeah,
however,
there's transmutation. There's three different types of ones where
there's a lot of gene transfer, but
there's three different types of genes transfers, and transmutation is one of them. And I know I've messed it up. Not my field. I'm not even going to pretend to know it all.
Yes, but that's the point. We can always be wrong, but it's about
we can be wrong.
That's why I think when you are in the position where you are trying to present science, you have to be careful with your wording, because I don't think there's anything wrong with going out and saying, as my understanding, I kind of think it's like this, but I'm not an expert. It's very different to go out and say, this is the case, without actually qualifying your level.
And the really cool thing about it is RNA viruses, going back to COVID, because it's an interesting offshoot here. RNA viruses have been around for a really long time. And the cool thing about them is they can actually inject bits of DNA into another being's DNA code. So
yes, in
that's
fact,
one way you can get insertions. That's the other one. That's the one way you can get insertions of DNA into people is through viruses. So some of the bits of our DNA come from viruses.
I've got a good one on that. One of the big genes in mammals that allows us to actually have placentas and give live birth. One of the big genes that allowed us, it wasn't the only thing, but it was over a process a long time, but one of the big factors that actually gave us the genetics to be able to turn eggs, like from a hard-shelled egg, into something that was then turned into like what would develop in the uterus, came from a virus. Because the actual code section is very, very similar. And I'm not exactly sure of the science, but they have demonstrated it's the same as certain viruses. They can actually show when, roughly in our evolutionary history, we actually got a gene that was for developing certain, I think it was certain like membranes, and we adapted it from what the virus was using it for into, I think essentially what became the placenta. So we can actually thank some of the process of birthing, which is not very good in humans anyway, but we can thank that part of that process to viruses. That was one of the big ones. And there was another one that I think we got from Neanderthals that may have also come from viruses about dealing with blood clots, but I could be wrong. I know we got actually part of one genetic we had, or one gene we got from Neanderthals for those humans that had it, was actually to do with it allowed for faster blood clots, which is good when you don't have medical care. But that gene has since been deactivated once we were able to look after each other better, and once we had some form of medical care, like we could wrap wounds, etc. But it's more complicated. But again, not again, but to bring this back to what our point is. What sort of thing about evolution would you like to learn, Jade? What could we
Yes.
possibly, with our limited knowledge, help you with? And also for anyone in the chat, sorry, feel free to
Yeah,
ask
if
us
you
questions
guys want to
too,
throw
if
some
you're
questions at, you could throw some biological evolution questions at two people whose main areas would be chemistry, maths, and physics.
Well,
Yes.
so one of the biggest things was how could life come from one organism? So that was something that that was a question they taught us to counter argue evolution.
So just before I get started, I attempt to have a go at that one. What was the counter they tried, like some of the common counters they tried to use on that?
We would basically say that it's not possible, that there's no way you could get all the different kinds of life that we have on Earth to come from one single organism to start with. And so there has to be a God that created all the different types of species. And then from there, the creature could change. So they just didn't like the word evolve.
Yeah. This is that whole argument of micro versus macro evolution, which is rubbish because no evolutionary scientist says micro and macro evolution. It's all evolution.
Never ever heard it in an actual science.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm also trying to keep an eye on Triple D in the chat there.
Okay, I know he's giving you.
Wait till tomorrow for those. I've got those. I can deal with those tomorrow. On Heretical, so make sure you show up for that. It'll be about the same time as this one, maybe a bit earlier. So hopefully he can be there for that. But sorry.
I guess what you're getting to, Jade,
Jade's
is one of those arguments would be irreducible complexity.
Or is that separate? I don't.
Or are you talking about something different? Where irreducible complexity is where the young Earth creationists claim that you couldn't have an eye evolve from something simpler because all the elements would have to be there at once.
Yep.
Because there's no reason for them to be there at thing. Look at the eye; it's too complex. It couldn't become from something simpler. Despite the fact that we have evidence alive in various animals now for the eye in all its stages of evolution.
Yeah. It was one of the ones Darwin loved as an example. So when creationists try and quote that, I would say it's more like a quote mine collapsed now because it's
So did you guys say that micro and macro evolution is not real? Those things don't
look, it's
the categories
it's not that they're not real. It's that the terms are meaningless. Yeah. Because when you're talking to people in evolutionary science, there's no difference between micro and macro. It's just a scale.
All evolution. It's a scale. It's a time frame and whether have they changed species basically.
And so evolution is pretty much genetic drift over time to put it as simple as possible.
Changing allele frequencies over time. And allele frequencies
now, of course,
just means drift in genetic code.
Yeah. All an allele is part of your DNA that codes for something. That's basically it. So it could be the allele for eye color. Well, it's a bit. You can say it's like the allele for eye color, even though there's like a dozen different genes that have something to do with your eye color. It's not that simple. But basically, you can think about it as what gives you certain traits. Now, so in terms of life having all one ancestor, it's possible that it didn't need to be that way. However, we can tell that it did because of certain similarities between all life. Now, for that, you're not necessarily talking to an evolutionary biologist, you're probably talking to a molecular biologist or a chemist, because it then goes into the actual DNA. So what they have tried to do is sequence the DNA of creatures, because at this point it's not just animal, it's fungi, it's protozoa, it's plants, it's everything on the family, the giant tree of life, which is actually better described as a bush. It's not a nice tree, branches. It's
several bushes as well. They branch off from each other with the roots. And
yes. once you get further away on those branches, they're not likely to cross again, but they do cross a lot. But keeping that in mind, you can actually go through and you can look at certain chemical signatures in DNA. You can look at how things produce and reproduce. You can look at how cells operate, and you can look at similarities. And so we started working backwards. Now, one of the things that I think would help with that is also the time scale. So life on Earth has been around for at least 3.5 billion years. We have that from fossils. Some of the oldest fossils for which are found in Australia, with some of the other oldest ones being in Canada, with evidence for life possibly being as much as 3.8 billion years. The problem is that we don't have rocks that have survived longer than 3.5 billion years, so we're looking for chemical traces at that point. So that's why we can't say definitely when it started. It's just too hard. But there's a lot of research gone into it. There are people who spend their entire lives looking for these things. And for this, probably or most likely more than 3.5 billion years, for about 2.9 billion years, there was nothing more complicated than single cells. Roughly. You don't start to see more complex animals, or you don't start to see things like animals and plants till what we originally thought was 600, though there was a recent find in the last few weeks that was published that would suggest we now have possible animal fossils of sponges from 800 and something like 890 or 800 and something million years ago. So it's about 800 million years, give or take, out of 3.5 billion. So what I think helps counter this just the time. Most of life on this planet has just been simple single cell.
Yeah.
Very similar to each other. It's basically a cell membrane with some form of DNA, RNA, protein, some way of reproducing, some kind of method that gets energy. The biggest changes that occur in terms of mutation have to do with the fundamental things, and they took the longest. For every difference between us as humans, for every small difference in our face is nothing compared to how our cells actually operate. And so I guess my counter to that is to do with the time. But then it's also to look at, well, how do all these cells operate? What's the basics? What are the actual fundamentals that define life? When you look at it, it's the same. We don't have life forms that operate on a fundamental level that is different.
Yeah.
We don't have a cell in a plant that works fundamentally different from a cell in an animal. Yes, plant cells have cell walls as opposed to cell membranes, or just a cell membrane. But in terms of like the basic layout for them, there's not a huge difference. Same with fungi. And the further back you go, the simpler you'd expect them to be, the closest to each other you'd expect them to be. And that's exactly what we find. And they have gone through and tried to figure out what the earliest life would look like. So they've sequenced the DNA of as many creatures as they can and tried to look for what was common. It's hard because a lot of those original genes probably have been like kind of wiped over or cleaned in a way that we probably won't see them. But they figured out that the early life probably wouldn't have been alive by our standards either. It was very simple. It was almost too simple to be alive, but it was capable of reproducing, and that was about it. Or maybe metabolizing. I think those are the two requirements. It's not an easy answer because we're looking at 3.5, 3.8, 3.9 billion years ago.
In the past. Yeah.
But there is no scientist on Earth who is going to tell you this is exactly how it happened. And to go back to some of the streams I've done with Gem, the reason why we're looking for life on other planets is to figure out, well, is this life just common to Earth, or can we see it elsewhere? Well, is it just found on Earth, or is it common to the rest of the universe? So
Because
these are not questions that any
that
scientist would say are answered.
It'd be unlikely that there'd be life anywhere else in the universe that evolved exactly the same way as it has here, and that even goes back to when there were singular cells. I mean, in the early days, there were more different types of singular cell organisms. The early race for singular cells to find what was most efficient, there was a lot of different types. But nearly every type of multicellular life that exists on Earth now evolved from eukaryotes.
So am I
one basically. Eukaryotes won the race. They got there first, they became multicellular, and at that point, you've got things that can eat microbes, and you win. But we still have microbes that are not eukaryotes.
Yeah, no. I just want to point out for anyone who's not sure what we're talking about here. So for a eukaryote, I believe, please, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, that's having mitochondria.
Yeah.
Is that? Yeah. So what happened was one cell, like a single-celled organism, like a bacteria, can't remember if it was actually a bacteria or similar to, swallowed another cell, but didn't digest it, and that cell in the inside ended up becoming like a little power, like a battery, like a power source, so that it gave the cell a lot more energy,
and that's
why you can actually have
multicellular. Yeah,
3 parents technically, because you get your male, female parents, but you can also have a third mother for mitochondrial DNA. It's always passed down through the female lineage, but you needed that extra cell generation. But we're talking about this very, very unique event that happened twice, actually. First with eukaryotes, and then again with plants to get the cytoplasts. I think it is.
There's two
but to
types.
get their photosynthetic parts.
But some plants
but
are
with a separate
some
one.
plants are eukaryotes as well.
Yeah, no, they're eukaryotes, but they did it again to get.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they did it again
I'm saying the No, what I'm saying is some plants come from the same base eukaryotes as animal life does. There is some plant life on Earth that doesn't come from the same base eukaryote that the rest of us did.
Because I know
all
it's
animal life on Earth does.
Yeah, but I think it's happened at least twice.
It has. At least twice.
At least twice where you've had one cell swallow another one without digesting it, and it's just become part of the other cell, and so
quite
it
probably
is
it's happened
confusing.
more
What it
often than
allowed
that because
for
of changes in the way that the mitochondrial works has probably happened for multiple. But
That's
it's
why I
hard
say
for
at
us
least
to trace it. Yeah.
Sorry, Jade's been winning.
My understanding was at the time one singular celled organism evolved into a fish of some sort that evolved into an animal that could walk on land of some sort, that then evolved and somehow reproduced and created all life, is what my understanding of what evolution was. Based on what you guys have said, it would actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, there would actually be many of those organisms. They would just be all the same. So it wasn't.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about a singular cell, once that had happened, once one of those cells has found another cell type that it could swallow and could use the energy from the cell it swallowed rather than digest it, as it were. Not that digestion exactly works the same for bacteria as it for single-celled organisms.
Metabolism of some kind.
It's rather than metabolizing it, it actually partnered with it. Once that had happened, when that cell reproduced, it reproduced the mitochondrial, the one it absorbed as well. So it wasn't that one that absorbed it and suddenly became multicellular. Eukaryotes were around for a long time before they managed to use that power store to become multicellular. And it probably happened a few times with the various different ones, and then they eventually, the things that were successful of becoming multicellular were the things that survived. Because especially early on with these things, microbes eat other microbes. Even the slightly larger microbes will eat other microbes. So at that point, the ones that are more successful, that get the better advantage from whatever they form themselves into when they divide and decide to clump together to be multicellular, the ones that have the bigger advantage are the ones that are going to survive because they're basically going to eat the other ones. In this sense, it is very much what Darwin thought of with survival of the fittest. It was just the mechanism for why it happened that he didn't understand.
I'm not a big fan of survival of the fittest.
I'm not either, really, but
doesn't mean what it used to.
No,
and it has kind of connotations that aren't really accurate.
It
all fittest means is what can reproduce the most.
Yeah,
that's it.
Basically, if you you didn't necessarily have to be the one that was more capable of eating all the others. If the way that you used your mitochondrial enabled you to reproduce faster and create more cell clusters. Something else couldn't eat you by you getting bigger, which was also another reason why things became multicellular, because getting bigger gave you protection. If you're bigger than whatever is the biggest predator at the moment, it's unlikely to try and eat you.
Yeah.
So-
And they have done that in a lab. They have actually had single-celled, was it algae? I think it was, in a lab, and they introduced a predator.
Yeah.
And over just the like human lifespans, they're able to evolve multicellularity that was it's referred to as stably heritable, which means that if you just let these things go, they'll still be multicellular several generations. It's not as though it was a fluke mutation and then it's gone the next generation.
Yeah.
This is something that is somewhat permanent, or at least semi-permanent. They're able to do that just by having that predator in there. Is exactly as Jen was saying. But
which is why we think when the eukaryotes first formed, when they first took on that mitochondrial for the powerhouse, they probably went multicellular fairly quickly. But there was lots of different types of multicellular.
Yeah. As I said, it's a branching tree, and most of the branches end.
Yeah.
So it's just trialing everything that occurs, any mutation that
occurs. And that
occurs
branching
that
then, if we could actually see it back 3.5 million years ago. Well, no, the first eukaryotes were a lot later than that. But when we got to the first eukaryotes, if we saw the branching that happened then, the branchings would be like something tried something and within a few weeks it was wiped out, and something else tried something else. It would have been so fast, that initial spurt to try and gain dominance. That's why we had when that eventually got to that point, we sort of had an explosion of life that was multicellular. Now, it still stayed fairly small multicellular for a very long time, but it was a big explosion.
As I said, like, it's those fundamental changes that we don't tend to get taught about because they're not as interesting to most people. I mean, I find them somewhat interesting, but they're not about like big dinosaurs or anything. But those changes are those fundamental small changes on a cell level that change how the cell operates, how it gets energy, how it feeds, which are more important than whether my nose is the right size to deal with the temperature. But what Jade was saying earlier when you were mentioning, going from, I can't remember what you said, to a fish to an amphibian.
Yeah.
That process of going from single-celled, or at least kind of very simple animal, to a fish is a process that took, from memory, about probably at least 400 or more million years.
Yes.
And it's not linear. That's the thing. Everybody, and it's depicted in textbooks. Even if you look at the thumbnail for this video, it's got a great example of how
the thumbnail for the video is called "The Ascent of Man," and that's not even how human evolution works.
Yeah, evolution is not a linear process. It's not one thing evolving into another. You can imagine it that it's like, I guess the analogy I got in my head is, imagine some electronic circuit. And you've got visible beams of electrons trying to move around, and they're moving. They can split into as many parts as they want, but a lot of those parts are dead ends. They're going to run into walls. And so it's splitting, it's trying to find its way through and feeding through, and you've got branches going everywhere. And most of those branches ended. Like 99.9% of all life on Earth is no longer with us. It's
crazy.
not like a fish turned into an amphibian. It was a fish, and there was millions of different types of fish, depending on how you want to define type, whether you're at species, family, genus, etc. level, but all of the subcategories within, because there's
and very few of them were the fish that we see now. Actually, fish is not a category.
Yeah, fish is not an evolutionary term, but I'm just using that because I'm trying to keep with what is normally depicted as some fish walking out on land. There was lots of different fish, and some of them had an advantage of what we reckon was for shallow water deposits where you had a lot of debris that you had to navigate, and so they had stronger fins that they could push on debris, like they could push, so like my mic.
Very much like the mud flappers we have now.
Yeah, so it wasn't limbs, but there was also regular fish. It wasn't as though one fish turned into another. It was, you had what we would consider just the original fish. I mean, the ancestor of all vertebrates was no bigger than my thumbnail, or yours, and it was just a small little like worm-like fish that had a backbone. I don't even think it had a jaw yet.
Of course, the problems that the fish had was they couldn't go permanently out of the water, or a longer term out of the water at all, because that they were designed for being in the water. They'd dry up. And the waters were even more salty back then, so they needed the evolutionary process to become an amphibian was the way of being able to be out of water for a longer period of time. Because if you got out of water where all the other animals were, you won. You were effectively the winner, because aside from plants, nothing else was on the... And plants, most of them...
Oh, and fungi.
Fungi.
So we have evidence that there were fungi that were taller than some of the plants early on. But sorry, that's a separate point. But most plants rely on fungi.
The point was, but you being the first animal to evolve to the point where you can more or less live on land away from the oceans, you have avoided your predators. You've won that evolutionary race by getting there. You've started a new one because other things are going to evolve from you and eat you.
Also, I was going to say, so I was going to add to that. That being said, it was actually a long time before herbivores on land evolved, because the digestive tracts that you needed for that took a lot longer. In fact, most things on land originally were in some way or another carnivorous. But what I was trying to get at is that it's not like just one fish that evolves into a land-dwelling creature. You've got lots of fish, and one of them is slightly better at moving its way through debris. Then, out of those fish, some of them are even better at that. Some of them can survive in lower oxygen water. And we still have fish that can do this. They're what's essentially their float bladders that they use to change buoyancy that pretty much all fish have. Sharks don't have them. That's why they can change depths. You can pull up deep sea sharks without killing them. Those bladders can also absorb oxygen, which means that if you pull them out of the water, they've got a slightly better chance at living a bit longer than those that don't. And it's actually those swim bladders that eventually became our lungs. But, well, what would be our lungs? Or all animal lungs. Which is why, one of the reasons why insects can't get too big is because they don't have lungs like we do. They can't pump oxygen through their bodies, so that it has to diffuse. So, yeah, that's a side note. Sorry, I can get into our giant insects later if people want.
Yeah, Nerdy just said, asked, what about insects?
Insects
were a different evolutionary thing onto land, because insects
once we're talking about fish, we're talking about vertebrates. We're talking about
vertebrates. We're talking about amphibians, then to reptiles and mammals eventually.
Yeah, and there are more variations in insects than there are in vertebrates. Yeah. But of those vertebrates, some of them were just... It was always slight. It's not big changes, but over time they build up, and it's not one path. There are multiple creatures, and they're all slightly better at land, but one of them is even better than the others. Yeah. One of them can last just a bit longer out of the water. One of them can last just a bit longer being completely dry. One of them can have eggs that survive slightly better in drier environments. And over time, these changes build up. You don't lose the previous ones immediately, at least.
Which is why you have
generally
amphibians
extinction
and
events.
then lizards, and then reptiles. Because amphibians evolved a type of skin that could survive on land, but could not survive for very long on land. So they still needed the water nearby.
Frogs are a good example.
They still need to go back to the water.
Their skin's very sensitive to chemicals.
Yeah.
So is this making sense, Jade? Sorry,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's clearing up a lot of misconceptions that I was taught, like we were talking about earlier.
So the thing from amphibians to reptiles is, I mean, if you look at amphibians today, the ones that we still have, especially like axolotls and newts, they look a lot like lizards, especially newts. But they're not. Their skins are different.
They turned me into a newt.
They don't.
I got better.
Well, they lay eggs. Sorry. Their eggs go through, a tadpole stage and then change. Now, in between that, the changes from that to being lizards was the effectiveness of changing the way that their skin structure works to where the lizards develop scales where the reptiles developed scales, which were more protection against being out of the water. So once you have this nice, good, solid outsider skin or scales, you can stay out of the water. You don't have to be in the water.
Oh, is it amniote? No, amniote's to do with the eggs.
Yeah. And then
because the egg's the other one, you also needed that.
And the
like
egg
when
is
we
the
think
other
of
one.
eggs, we think of hard-shelled eggs. Again, that was so the eggs would survive in drier environments.
Because the animals moved into
the
the drier environment. The only way they could survive with breeding without having to go back to water. And there is good evidence of early reptiles that actually had to go back to water to lay their eggs. Because they had more permeable shells. We actually still have reptiles that are like that are in the in-between. But then you have the later reptiles which laid the harder shells, and they could lay their eggs in desert areas and things, and they could move more away from the coast. Because you're talking about a time when you've got like, is Pangea back then? Yeah, Pangea.
No. Back then it would have been a previous landmass. Pangea came later.
Yeah, Pangea came later. So whichever one the first one is, because I can't remember what it's
maybe
called.
Was it Gondwana?
It might be Gondwana.
No, you'd already gone through a couple supercontinents. It's been about 4 or so.
Yeah, I can't.
The first
remember.
one was the supercontinent of
Yeah, but that would be pre things coming onto land.
Yeah, that was pre-land.
Well, not pre-land. It was land. Pre-land animals and that. I mean, the plants were the ones who first made it onto land by mosses and.
But it took them a while because they also needed the fungi to evolve to allow them to, because they rely on fungi to pull nutrients out of the earth.
Yeah.
And we have evidence for that delay because it took that long. Because the plants could survive out of the water, but they couldn't absorb nutrients out of the soil without the fungi. So the fungi also had to evolve to survive on land. But again, the first trees were simple. They were like little moss-like or little fern-type, little tiny little plants. And then they slowly got bigger. The biggest plants I think we saw early on was in the Carboniferous, which is where we get most of our coal from, hence why it's called Carboniferous, because it's after all the carbon-bearing coals that we get.
There's a mixture of... Most of it's plant life, but it's not what you think. Most people think, most of the coal and oil we get is from forests, but it's actually from plant life that was in shallow oceans.
Yeah, or like marsh-type oceans. It was very wet environments, but with a very high oxygen content. And the reason we get so much from there is because bacteria hadn't yet evolved to decay plant matter. So all the plant matter just fell onto the ground and stayed there.
Yep.
And so that kind of helped take a fair bit. I think that helped take some of the carbon or the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, which we're now putting back in by burning the stuff. But that's a separate point. But at the time, because there was higher oxygen, you also had insects that, based on the way their bodies work, they tend to, although it's more complicated than this, and this is where brain bug would probably be helpful for this.
Yeah, shame he's not about.
Most insects, for the most part, as a drastic oversimplification, have one mechanism or another where they just kind of absorb oxygen out of the air. They don't pump it around. They don't have lungs that move. There's a few that have things that are close to a rudimentary circulatory system. Yeah. So there's certain ants where they walk and their legs kind of pump basic blood, because they do have blood, but they don't have lungs that move or hearts in the way that we, or like vertebrates do. So they have to rely on oxygen diffusing in, so in a way like dissolving in. So if they get too big, the oxygen can't get to their inside tissue, which is why they can't get big. But back in the Carboniferous, when we started seeing a lot more of these amphibians and started to see land animals, the first amniotes as well, so these things that can have eggs that can stay out of the water permanently, creatures that can live on land, you also had giant insects.
And by giant, that's really giant.
Yeah, we're talking like several meter long millipedes.
Yeah.
We have fossils of them, and we also have their trackways, so we know how they walked. And Arthropleura was the one I'm thinking of, if anyone wants to Google it. I'm not going to try and spell it. But they could get big because there was more oxygen. It could diffuse further. And so they reckon that was probably why they had a relatively thin exoskeleton. The outside shell was thin because it would help with maybe diffusing. They're not entirely sure because we're going back 350 million years. And when I say that, there's a big range in that. It's not, oh, they existed at one time. It's a weird range, and then they would slowly disappear or disappear at the end of one of these time periods. Because when they break it down, all of these down, so when I'm talking about the Carboniferous, I'm talking about the Ordovician, which I think was the one that came before it. I'm not sure. I'm not a paleontologist or a geologist. But when they talk about these big time periods, they're always separated, notably in the Earth. That's when we saw the layers. So that's how they define them, as you have to tell the difference. And often there's also a difference in the fossils. So there's generally been an extinction event. Some of the earlier ones we reckon may not have actually been extinction events. We just don't have fossils from certain animals after a certain point. So it looks like they went extinct, but they didn't. So it gets really confusing. It's not simple, and it's not someone saying a fish evolved into this or this evolved into that. It's a very complex web and tree that people are trying to put together.
One of the things I've heard young earthers say a lot is, oh, where's all our fossil evidence? You know, if there's the bit that they miss is making a fossil is very, very hard. It has to be buried in the right way without animals tearing the tissues apart or spreading the bones out.
Anything tearing
it apart, or being attacked and eaten up by microbes or whatever else, which usually means that they're in a muddy-ish sort of swampy terrain.
It's generally shallow water environment where they get covered very quickly. It's generally some kind of landslide or mudslide in a shallow sea environment.
And yes, over a very long period of time, a lot of those happen and a lot of fossils get made. So we have a lot of them, but in comparison to all the animals that have ever lived, we probably have fossils.
We've got small windows.
We got small windows. We've probably got fossils for less than 2% of all animals that have ever existed.
Probably. And yet it's still more extensive than we'd ever understand.
Yeah.
And we're probably only going to see the things that are slightly more common. We're not going to see the rarer or like the subspecies from the Carboniferous. It's just, whilst we will have one or two examples, we're not going to see nearly the variety. But what we can do is we can look at genetics, and you can map genetics to these understandings. So we have an idea of how they kind of occurred, because we can see what's alive now, as Jen's mentioned, with like axolotls and newts, and if you want to go lungfish, it can almost walk on land too if you breed them that way, if you don't give them any water. We can see the kinds of things we'd expect. We can see what sort of adaptations would work in which environments, and which ones would probably have led to our earlier ancestors, for example, or the early ancestors of today's insects. So when we talk about Arthropleura, and we can go looking for these in the genetics, and we can also run computer programs that don't rely on us looking for similarities, but actual hard similarities in the genes, and it maps a tree of life that is almost identical to what we've spotted through morphology, through fossils, through all the previous methods. In fact, it's actually corrected our understanding. So it is not a simple thing. It is many different processes going on at once that map together to give us a picture.
And I'm going to give Ring comment of the night for that one. Well done, Ring.
So basically, everything I was told was just a very simplified, basic understanding of kind of what happened.
Yeah.
Kind of, but it was simplified to the point of error, I would say, and like we're all guilty of that, doing that on occasion. But I think from what I have seen of, plus what you have said, I think it is simplified deliberately to the point of error, not from your point, but from the people who are in charge of representing it.
Yeah.
Like, if you say, "Oh, it was just a fish that decided to go onto land," no, there was no decision.
No,
there was many different fish, and some of them were slightly better, as we described earlier, doing certain things that eventually led to them being able to walk on land, but they're not fish anymore. By the way, fish is not a nice term. But like dinosaurs is another good example. Most people, when you think of dinosaur, will think of things that aren't dinosaurs. Dinosaur is far more specific than you would expect. It's you have to be a diapsid with legs that face directly under you and a certain shaped pelvis.
Yeah.
And that's the other one. So a lot of I've seen young Earth creationists, and I want to ask Jade about this. Whether this was something you were told, that you were represented as any kind of ancient beast was a dinosaur, like a pterosaur or like a flying pterodactyl or Quetzalcoatlus was a dinosaur, or like Pleurodon. For those who like our Charlie adventures,
which weren't dinosaurs. They were actually they were reptiles, but they weren't dinosaurs.
They were proper lizards.
Yeah, proper lizards.
So were the mosasaurs and the plesiosaurs. Ichthyosaur means fish lizard, actually. They were proper
the plesiosaurs
reptiles.
were not dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs aren't as much.
I did think those were.
Did you get that simplification too?
Yes, absolutely. And I also was told that we lived with dinosaurs. So, but they died in the flood.
The thing is, technically, we do live with dinosaurs.
But we do.
They're called birds.
Yeah.
But I know that's not what you would have been told.
Yeah,
also, did you ever see a dinosaur with feathers from the young Earth creationist point of view? Did they ever explain they had feathers? Yeah.
No.
Because for some reason they like simplifying them and keeping the older version we had of them as kind of slow, sluggish reptiles that were nowhere near as bird-like. Because everyone talks about half a wing. I'll see if I can find the picture. I don't know if Jen can show it. Let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, I can.
Because that's the one I've heard so many times. And Jay, did you find that was like half a wing, specifically that example? Why don't we see half a wing? It's not useful.
Yeah, we said that, and we did actually. Now that you said we do still live with dinosaurs, we did say that, but the dinosaurs that were still alive were ones that could swim, and so they didn't die in the flood. So
most dinosaurs are not water dwelling.
Yeah, swamp dwelling.
Sorry, Jen. I don't know if you can bring up this picture that I've got here.
Hang on a second.
I can also bring up a dromaeosaur too.
I can. Give me a second.
It's also covering the stream, so I can't see the chat at the moment.
Yeah, I know you can't see the chat.
But when you do, but when you do bring this up, Jade, can you let me know when you see it as well? Although you probably see on our screen. But there we go. That is a good half wing. I'm pretty sure that's a rendering of what we kind of understand a velociraptor to look like.
Yeah.
So screw Jurassic Park. So if you want to look at these things, when we look at like half a wing, it wasn't for flying. It was still useful. It was very useful for actually looking after eggs, because these things were warm-blooded.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know the exact colors for most dinosaurs, though we do have a few examples. I'll see if I can... I actually do have a picture of one. Let me see if I can bring it up. I'll just put it on top of the other one so it shows up. Yeah. So this one here, I don't know if you can see the change. Let me check. Oh, Ankylosaurus, I think it is. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. We know what the color for this one is, or we kind of have a very good understanding of the color, because we've actually had a fossil that was well enough preserved to find the colors of its feathers. So like these things, we can pick them up. These are the things that existed before birds,
and
or around roughly the same time, early birds.
They didn't fly.
Yeah.
The feathers were for warmth. They were their version of hair, of fur.
Yeah. And in fact, if you look at the earliest feathers, which I love, the scientific term, well, the more colloquial term in science for the early feathers was dino fuzz. Because it was just, it was like hair that was slightly more complicated. And over time, it developed into the feathers we see. And in fact, in a really good case of convergent evolution, pterosaurs, which are related to dinosaurs but not on the same branch, they branch a bit earlier. They're archosaurs as well, so you have to go back a few million years. They also developed a fluff like dinosaurs and developed into a early form of proto-feather, but it was very different from what dinosaurs had. Now, of course, pterosaurs didn't survive. Now, one of the reasons they didn't is that they got out-competed by birds. So the only niches they held towards the end of the reign of these animals before the asteroid that wiped them out was to get bigger. The largest birds were about the size of the smallest pterosaurs. So when the asteroid hit and nothing bigger than a... Yeah, I'll stop sharing. Sorry, give me a second.
Oh, that's fine.
And so when that asteroid hit, nothing bigger than 20 kilos survived. So that's why we don't tend to have them around. That's how we know that there weren't any T-Rexes that survived, was because the fossil record and everything we understand about what happened, we've found the impact. We can simulate roughly how big it was. We can see the layer of dust or iridium dust that deposited around the Earth. We have a very good understanding of what it did, even if it's not perfect. And it burnt off and then froze most of the Earth's forests. So if you're in the sea, you had a slightly better chance, and if you were small,
you had a very good chance.
Particularly omnivorous and small. But
Because
again,
plants recover
I'm
quicker.
kind of doing this because I love it. It's interesting, but also it shows just it's not simple. It's not like we have half a wing, we have half of this. It's everything is in stages, and it's all useful to a point, which also I think covers the irreducible complexity too. It doesn't have to work how we understand it. Like with the fish, it doesn't have to be a leg. It doesn't have to decide to grow legs. It was just fins that were slightly better at pushing through debris and water. And then that's... So all vertebrates share a common ancestor with... it's the type of fish. Not lobefin. Is it lobefin fish? I had the right lobes for that? Or is it
it's the right type of... Yeah. I don't know if it's a lobefish, but I know what you're talking about.
Sorry. It's complicated, and I'm not an expert in this.
It's very interesting, and
although Nerdy's got it right, you can have half a wing.
Yeah.
I have definitely had to accept the fact that I do not know a lot, because it's hard coming from believing I know everything, thinking that the Bible was 100% fact, to, oh boy, I'm 29 years old and learning what kids learn in high school.
I mean, a lot of what I'm saying here I didn't learn in high school.
Oh, no, you learn it later.
I've learned it later. Yeah. And a lot of what I do, like, I will go hunting for this information. Like, I love watching this. I will go and learn about specific discoveries in paleontology or certain dig sites. Like, I'll do that out of interest, which I don't expect most people to do, but I just find it fascinating. Like, it was somewhat recent, and fossilization is very rare. What's more rare is to get any skin or feathers or anything like that preserved, and what is more rare than that is any internal organs, and what's even more rarer than that, anything in 3D. Yet, they managed to get all of that in... It's fairly recent. It was an Ankylosaurus that they found in a quarry. It was some miners, and I think the foreman, like, they were digging and they spotted a section of harder, darker rock. And the foreman, or one of the people they're working, he was just a miner. He was just a guy who was working in the mines. Noticed, no. This is probably a fossil. Like, we need to take care of this. So they called in some paleontologists. They extracted it. They did that, and they found an almost perfectly preserved Ankylosaurus fossil. I think it was an Ankylosaurus. I'm probably wrong. But it was the ones with all the... There was like a turtle, like, with all the spikes on it and the big tail. And they found its head, but it was preserved in 3D. They found remains of its gut contents. We could figure out its color, not like a black and white picture of its color shading, like what was darker and lighter. So we know it was counter shaded despite being very big. We figured out what it where its spikes were, and that they were coated in like carotene, and like, it was an amazing find. But that's rare. So a lot of fossils that we have, yes, are not complete, but nobody claims they are. But also, you'd be surprised how much you can tell by a simple fossil. Most of the early mammals are only understood by jaw fossils, fragments of a mandible, so like the lower jaw.
I'm going to answer
you can
what
tell a lot.
Don said in the thing about dinosaurs had fur and feathers, not scales. Quick little side note to that.
Both.
But even skin, our skin is technically scales. It's just the scales evolved to being smaller and smaller and...
If you want a good example of scales being left on a mammal, look at the tails of rodents.
Yeah.
So like mice and rats. They still actually have essentially scales. So there's one for Nerdy if he's there. He can look at his own tail.
Yeah.
But yeah, they do, because that's not something that quite disappeared. Sorry, I like
and
that
of course,
fact
Jeff
that
brings up
rats-
the common one. If we evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Yeah.
That's what I
Because
believed
you
as
don't
well, is
evolve
that-
out of what you are. So we are still
We are
monkeys.
monkeys.
We are apes. You know, well,
We are
you don't evolve out of
simian
what you
forms.
are. We are still eukaryotes. Where you just evolve into being something new, but you don't leave out
That's
what
why
you were
fish is not a
behind.
useful term.
Yes.
That's why fish isn't a useful term in paleontology, because it doesn't describe anything specific. We would be fish.
Yeah.
So instead, it's much easier to classify things differently.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things that would be fish, and it also means that you get, like, it doesn't cover everything perfectly. I forget what the term for that.
Yeah. But colloquially, fish is just things that swim in the water. That's why a Christian could technically argue that Jonah was in a whale, because for all intents and purposes, you could call a whale a fish, because fish has no real meaning.
Yep.
Yeah. But I don't
give
think
them that
most
one.
people... Yeah, I don't mind. It doesn't matter which way around you go. It still
Doesn't
just as
work.
ridiculous.
Yeah. You wouldn't be inside the stomach of a whale for 3 days. Sorry.
I think Pinocchio would have had a better idea,
Yeah.
or a better chance of surviving, because he wasn't actually
Yeah, he was wood.
animate in our sense. He didn't have flesh. There we go. That's a throwback to the old Disney cartoon.
It is.
But yeah, there's some weird evolutionary traits out there. But you can see this trial and error is that when you see new things forming, like new areas being conquered, you'll see a lot of weird and wacky designs early on, and then as time develops, the ones that work stay around, and everything becomes more similar. So if you look at like the Cambrian explosion, which is another one I've heard, creation, like, oh well, they say all life started in the Cambrian explosion,
Nope.
forgetting that we're talking about an area of like at least 10 million years. I think it's closer to 50 million years. And it wasn't the only one. The bigger explosion was actually the Ordovician. No. It might have been it was the next one. There was actually the next major time period over. There was another massive explosion that
Yeah, I
was
can never
even
remember
bigger
the
than the
order of them
Cambrian
either.
explosion, but you never heard about it. Well, you generally don't hear about it because it's not quite as interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I find it
And there's
fascinating,
been lots
despite
of
not being able
mass
to remember the
extinctions
name.
too. Well, what we think of mass extinctions. Going back to the dinosaur mass extinction, it's not... Whilst the asteroid that hit us at Chicxulub was what finished them off, they were dying out anyway.
I'm not sure if they're dying out, but there was lower diversity.
Yeah.
So, but
And
that
part of
could
that
have
was
also been
because
a
of
product
the,
of their own success.
Partly that, and partly the volcanic activities from the...
From my understanding,
I can't remember
the
name of
direction we're
place.
going now. It was in Mexico. In India.
In India, yes, I know that.
I read the paper that was
into Siberia.
trying to date them.
But something rather
No,
flats.
Siberia. Permian PT extinction for Siberia.
Okay, so it was the other one.
That
But,
was the previous
something
mass
rather
extinction,
flats.
Great
And I can't
Diet.
remember what
Sorry.
they were called.
Yeah, no, the Deakin Flats.
Deakin flats. Deakin.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
They now, looking back at it, from my understanding, they reckon that was not as much of a factor as we thought. From my understanding, the way the literature is moving this way, and I haven't read too much into the actual literature, it's more secondhand, when they're moving more to the asteroid was what did it. But yes, diversity in dinosaurs was decreasing. But that could be, let's say you've got a bunch of predators around and you've got T-Rexes. The T-Rexes are more successful, so all the other predators die off and you're just left with one, which is really bad when you have an extinction event. But of course, it's the way life tends to trend sometimes.
Now I've got an
You don't
interesting thing to go
always-
with that Deakin flats and effects of it and things that help us time stuff that what happened. There's a recent paper written on it, and it's to do with the not just the actual axial tilt of the Earth, but where actually the true not the magnetic north pole, well, the magnetic pole is, but where the actual pole is for rotational. And because the pole does move, because the Earth wobbles, not just the pole wobbling, but the Earth, the location where the pole is within the Earth shifts as well. So the Earth's rotation actually shifts slightly, but it's only usually a few degrees. At that point, the rotation shifted for about 1 million years by 12 degrees. And they think it had which is huge. Like, that effectively where the North and South Pole were completely changed for a period of 1 million years. And they think what was
50, today's tilt is about 20 degrees. It's
what they think happened
of
was
today's tilt
a huge mass of molten core shifted in location and eventually caused the Dickens-Flats, and it took the time for the Dickens-Flats to run before the Earth actually settled back into its normal rotation because of that movement of mass under the Earth's surface.
That's a new one to me.
Yeah. So they've actually seen the movement of the poles in where the tectonic plates have moved, and you can see the magnetic markers in it, and they know that the physical pole actually moved. So the Earth actually was rotating around some point in Canada and whatever was on the other side. So
that would do it.
Yeah, so it was
mess things
so
up.
you think about it, that's actually pretty amazing.
Where Canada currently is.
Yeah, where Canada
because
currently
it wouldn't have been
is,
there. Yeah, it wasn't there at the time.
65 million years ago? No, not exactly there, no.
No, you still got South and North America pretty much attached to Europe and Africa. I think Antarctica and Australia... Oh, no, Antarctica was still attached because marsupials still had to spread from South America to Australia.
Yeah.
So you've still got the bridge between Antarctica
but yes, approximately where
Antarctica
Canada is now is where it was. So for nearly
for Jade, if you're
years,
not sure, what you can do is you can actually look at where fossils show up to map where continents used to be connected.
As well as the shapes. I mean, the shapes were what our first things were, but it's actually the fossil record that actually shows where things
was what sealed it. But on top of that, now you can use geology. You can look at the actual rock layers, and
we can see how they move, and we can run time backwards.
Which is also how they know that at one point. So it was about 600 million years ago, or maybe 500. So very early on in multicellular life. So you're looking at basic animals, sponges, etc. The Earth went into, there was 2 times that it did it, into snowball Earths, where you had a negative, like a reverse runaway greenhouse effect, where as ice started to freeze over the poles, it's shiny, it's white, it reflects the heat and the light back out into space. So if you start getting more ice, you reflect more heat back out, and you get colder and you get more ice, and it goes around. And it got so bad that ice stretched all the way, and they reckon there was glaciers almost as far as the equator, with ice at least possibly covering the entire Earth. Maybe a small gap around the equator where there was some liquid water on the surface for I forget how many million years each. That happened twice.
Yeah,
and yet life survived through that. What saved the Earth in both cases from being that frozen hellscape was volcanoes. You had a lot of volcanic eruption that spewed a lot more CO2 and other things into the air that allowed to heat the planet back up. And as the ice melts, it goes the other way. You start absorbing more heat. And so it went back to what was roughly normal. But yeah, the Earth nearly became a giant frozen wasteland for a while. Yeah,
well,
life decided that it wasn't done.
Technically, at the moment, we should be, and it's probably helping us stave off global warming a little bit longer. We actually should be in a cooling phase for the Earth because of where we are in.
Should be.
But we're not. But we are warming, which shows how bad man-made climate change is because we are warming in a cycle that should be cooling, and that's at least buying us a little bit of time, but not much. And that's one of the problems with that. But that's a different
the rate at which we're doing damage is so fast compared to the rate at which the Earth normally changes. Like, the rate of change now of temperature is comparable to the worst extinction event in the Earth's history.
Yeah,
that was the end Permian or the Permian Triassic, because you generally name extinction events based on the 2 time periods that it separates. So the PT extinction event, which took out roughly 96% of all species on Earth. It's like 95, 96 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell exactly because, again, fossil record won't preserve everything. It was something like 80s, and then it depends on what level too, whether it was species or genera. But it took out. It was the worst extinction event. We lost most of the life on this planet.
Yeah.
Yet, mammal ancestors, so mammal-like reptiles, a few of them survived, and a particular archosaur that had a pelvis joint that kind of allowed it to almost run on two legs survived, which later became dinosaurs. Forget what its name was. As well as a couple of other archosaurs. One group later became the pterosaurs, and another one became all these giant, they looked like giant crocs on four legs standing upright, like on four legs. That they reckon some of which were actually probably bipedal. They didn't actually use their front limbs for running. They would run on two, even though they leant far forward. They were another one that rivaled the dinosaurs for a while, but weren't quite as efficient as them in terms of respiration, so they lost out in the long run.
Well, the fact that dinosaurs evolved into warm-blooded actually was an advantage for them.
Yes, they actually have. So birds and most dinosaurs, they reckon, had a circular breathing process that we can't do. That meant that they could also they could keep more active.
Yeah.
So if you put a T-Rex up against any similar-sized mammal, it would destroy them. It would be faster, it would be stronger, it would be lighter, because their bones are pneumatic, which means they're kind of hollow bones. They're lighter, but they're still pretty strong, which is also how a lot of dinosaurs and pterosaurs could fly, because they weren't as heavy as you think. It's how birds fly too. Sorry, I like all these random facts, but
we're a bit off topic.
I just wish I was better with names.
Well, kind of on topic, but off topic. Did you have any other questions that you actually wanted to see if we could answer, Jay?
You guys have answered a lot of them, even indirectly, with the conversation. It's really funny listening to you guys talk about it and remembering the things that I was told and how some of them are so similar but just twisted. And I think that time frame,
because you have to do that. They have to try to be close, and then take it down an avenue to either whitewash it or anything. Oh, I mean, that comes back to one of the things of like. They have this thing that the universe has to be old, which is why you say it's old, because you need it to be old to have millions of years for evolution, and it is a big argument that's often thrown by it. But the fact is, we know the Earth's old. The Earth has to be old. There is a major problem for any possible life on this planet if the Earth was young, and that's the radioactive decay of isotopes. Because we know how much there was and how much there is now, and if it didn't decay at the slower rates that we know these things decayed at, we would have a heat problem.
So I want to add one thing to that radioactive decay, because one of the things I've heard from some of the youngest creationists, again, I want to get Jade's input on this too, if this was what she'd heard, is that when it comes to that, it's like, we know how much there was to start with, and we know how there much now. Is that one you've heard where it's like, but they assume they knew how much, say, uranium was around at the beginning? Is that? Yeah, we don't just use that. What you can do is when you get multiple decay steps, you can actually map them out, and this also goes well beyond what I've looked at in any detail. You can actually map it out so that it doesn't matter what the starting one is. We can tell how long it's been decaying for, because there is nothing we can do that significantly changes the decay rates. I think there's some evidence that you can change them slightly, but it is not enough to make a difference in terms of how long the Earth's been around. Like it's minuscule differences at best. But one of the things is you can actually take, because you get multiple steps, or you'll have when you have the decay rates, you'll get isotopes that also aren't very common too. So you can map them, and you can actually, in most cases, tell if there's contamination or tell what the starting ratios were, because you look at every component along the way. Plus, you map different methods to each other. It's never one method, it's multiple. No scientist ever takes one measurement, goes, we're done, and sits there with their hands
It doesn't
crossed.
work like that. And if they did, somebody else would come along and show them why they were wrong.
Yes, or someone else would come through and do more
backup
science,
work, yeah.
find more answers, and show them.
Update it, yeah.
And they think that Christian scientists have done all of that.
Yeah, they haven't.
Well, see, yeah, I don't like that term. I just don't.
There are plenty of
It's not-
of scientists who are Christians in the world.
Yes, but
Yeah,
it's also
I don't like the
wider
term
because it
Christian
makes
Scientist.
such an us versus them when it's
Yeah.
not. It is
Well, it
a
shouldn't
few
be.
of these people trying to misrepresent science to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
not us versus them. There are plenty of people I know who are very religious who do good science.
Yes. Yes, I
In
definitely
fact, most
think that-
Christians are not young earthers. And in America, I think you could make that argument, but not outside America.
That was something fascinating for me to find out because that was something that was so taught here. And, you know, I thought what was said in the Bible is fundamentally the truth. So it's weird for me to see other Christians like kind of pick what they want to take as literal in the Bible and what they don't. Because if you do take the Genesis story literally, evolution isn't a part of that. So yeah, it was weird for me to find out that there were Christians out there that didn't believe the earth was 6,000 years old and that God created the earth without evolution. But then I have an uncle who believes that evolution fits in what the Bible says and thinks that God
Yep.
created evolution.
That is much closer to the sort of Christian I was when I had some weird views towards the end of it for Christianity. I mean, weird for Christianity, but yeah, I always loved science. I never saw a conflict, and most of the times my view was, well, God made the laws of physics. He made the laws of science. Why would he mess with them?
Yeah.
So I had a view that even if towards the end, probably more than anything else, like the last few years, that so when people said, oh, but we got natural explanations for most of the things in the Bible, I saw that as a good sign. I thought, yeah, if God didn't have to do a miracle, if he could just set everything up to run the way he wanted, and natural explanations would still lead to having these stories the way he wanted, why wouldn't he?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then, of
Why
course, we've
couldn't
got
he
the
just set
things
everything
like,
to run from the beginning?
If you're an engineer
Even
and
if-
you're going to design something, you don't cut the corners that evolution cuts.
Oh, yes. That's the other one.
And-
We all have genes for making vitamin C, but they're all broken. So if we don't get enough vitamin C, we get scurvy. But we've got the genes to do it. They're just broken just too far for them to be activated again. We can't reactivate them. They're too far gone. But we have the genes.
Oh, wow.
Actually, pretty much all most mammals have that gene, I think.
The one I
and
love
I
the
think it's
most
broken
is
in-
the one that the young Earth creationists try to use to, like, with irreducible complexity is the eye, and they go, oh, you couldn't have it. But our eyes
The eye is a
are
terrible design.
dreadfully designed. The nerve that connects...
I'm just looking at Jade's glasses.
for the optics, yeah. The nerve that connects... No, the nerve that connects...
It's the wrong way round.
It's the wrong way
They
around.
connected
It
it the wrong
attaches
way
at the
round.
front instead of behind, because as a little fishy in the ocean, it didn't matter. And now that we've evolved from that particular fish that had this weird back to front eye, we're up on land, we have this permanent blind spot in our eyes because our optic nerve gets
Yeah.
in the way of our
Ooh,
vision.
I was
Our
doing that
brains
on
have
one
to
of
fill
my
the
little-
spots in by moving our eyes around.
Yeah, I was showing my young cousin that, and he loved it. It like amused him for longer than anything else I'd seen that evening that I showed it. Yeah, you do 2 dots on a paper about so far apart. Maybe one across and one a circle, and then
Yeah.
you cover one eye, and you can actually bring it to a point where one of them just disappears. Just becomes white with the rest of the paper. And I love that. But yeah, our eyes are terrible. They also break down really easily. Cataracts is
Yes.
another one.
They do.
Octopus, cephalopods actually, more generally,
Cephalopods.
have better eyes than we do.
Well, because the cephalopod nerve actually connects from behind.
Yes, it's connected
our
the right
eyes
way.
were
But they
evolved
reckon...
to work in water, so our brain has to constantly compensate for our inefficient lens and eyeball design for working outside of fluid.
Yes, it's why... Yeah, we're not... But, however, Birds, on the other hand, can correct for refraction. So they can see through the deflection in water to catch prey. But that is why they don't see glass very well and they keep flying into windows. Because they can't see the deflection of the light because their brain corrects for it. So they don't see a window there. Unless there's like marks or like something solid in it.
That's brilliant.
That's why they keep running into windows. Well, one of the main reasons they run into windows, they don't see it the way we do.
So keep your windows dirty, people.
Or as we had to do, because we kept getting them fly into our glass fences around here, we put up ornaments, like metal wire, like shape ornaments that kind of cover it and make it very clear that this is not a clear flight path.
Yeah.
We had a couple of lorikeets that we had to look after, including some
there's
that we
many things like
took
that,
to the
like
vet.
redundant organs that we have. Like the appendix.
The appendix, they reckon, is actually useful for resupplying our gut with bacteria. But then again, if our gut was designed properly in the first place, we wouldn't need an appendix. No. Nor would the appendix be prone to bursting and dying, occasionally deciding to try and kill
and the
us.
laryngeal nerve, which is the big one.
That's a better one.
That is a good one.
I mean, the reproductive system of a human is a great example of how we're not designed.
Yes.
Or how the designer was incompetent. One of my favorite ones, the Robin Williams was the human body designed by committee. He does a great sketch on how a committee was trying to put together the male and female reproductive organs, and it was like the male parts. It was just, what have we got left lying around? And then someone's like, we got a bit of turkey neck lying around here somewhere. Oh, it's amazing. And it's like, for the female parts, Clint had a very good idea. We're thinking of naming it after him. What did you have, Clint? And it just goes through. That's one of my favorite of his sketches. But it's just all these it is. It's a waste processing plant next to a recreation area. It's not how you design things. I said, if my body was produced or was designed, I want a refund.
Yeah. Yes. But yes, the laryngeal nerve is the big example that you've probably seen lots on it, Jade. Now. Yeah.
I may have, but I don't remember that one.
Okay, so one of the nerves that connects to the is it our throat, Jen? The back of our throat or the voice on the voice?
Yeah.
It's a nerve that runs from our brain to our mouths,
part of our larynx,
or our throats.
This is what's called laryngeal nerve.
Sorry.
So
yeah, and in fish, we're based on where their bones were. It kind of ran fairly directly. It ran back behind one of the bones. Now in fish, that's a direct journey. Once you start to get to vertebrates that are on land, and when you get to humans, that means it has to run all the way down past what used to be that bone, and then down into the chest,
and loop,
and then come back around that
the
bone,
main artery of the heart, and come back up. Yeah,
yeah, has to run all the way through, because from an evolutionary point of view, to change that nerve to jump all of those is too big of a gap. It can't.
So it just gets longer as necks get longer, and as heart position shifts. Just make the nerve longer. So the ridiculous thing is you have a giraffe. And I'm sure
no, you get better than that, Jen. The
one?
Titanosaurids.
Oh yeah, well the Titanosaurus, yes.
The largest, all the dinosaurs with those extremely long necks had a nerve that ran from their brain all the way down to their chest cavity and back up just to go to their mouth, or the larynx. Just at the back of the
and it was and we know that we see this now. I mean, even if you don't want to believe even if somebody didn't want to believe that was the case with dinosaurs, giraffes are exactly the same. They have this nerve that comes all the way down from their brain, loops down around the major arteries to the heart, and comes back up, which is ridiculous. If somebody was intelligently designing something, you wouldn't do that. You just go straight there. But no.
So I'm just trying to look up how long some of their necks were to figure out what sort of journey this was. Yeah, they're like a 15... It's a 30-meter journey for what is a couple of centimeter gap.
Yeah, that's insane.
For, if you want to look at some of the really big Titanosaurids. It's... No. This is not how you design bodies. But it is how evolution makes things. Because it doesn't need to be perfect. It
Yeah.
just needs to be good enough.
And
As
that's
long
the
as
thing.
it's good enough to have kids, that's all that evolution cares about.
There's no aim.
Which is
for
also why-
evolution. The evolution didn't
Yes.
start from here to get to humans, and it hasn't stopped with
Yeah,
us.
but it's also
we are
why
not an
humans love
evolutionary dead.
certain
Well,
activities
hopefully
so
we're not an
much.
evolutionary dead end. But we will in a million years' time. We won't be humans anymore. We'll be whatever the next evolution is.
You could
provided
argue
we
we're a
survive that
natural
long.
selection dead end now, and so it's other selection methods that are going to dominate, because natural
Maybe.
selection probably won't determine.
Assuming we
who
don't
reproduces
mostly wipe
anymore.
ourselves out and we end up going
Yeah,
backwards.
but that won't be natural selection. That'll
No,
be
that's
some
true,
form of
'cause we
human
caused that
selection. But I think
ourselves.
I'm just being pedantic here. That's probably just I that's not necessarily how it goes. But I know what you mean.
Oh, well done. Still.
Still's around. I've got a few people in the chat who've been here.
For being here this long.
Okay, so just
I'm
notice
thinking
Sand-
we're at 2
Sandy's
hours.
saying
Maybe we
was
should
for me to just-
look at winding up.
Yeah, so I just want to quickly answer something Sandy was saying. Matt, wait until you get much older. You'll want restitution. Now, I can already tell you at my age, I have done a lot of damage to my body that was not intentional. Like, it's not from, like, me making bad decisions. It is just my body was that poorly designed. Well, I mean, I did spill a chemical weapon, so I guess you can say that's not necessarily the fault of my body being poorly designed to anything other than being impervious to certain chemicals. But, like, I have a fractured back. I think it's still fractured, but I definitely have fractured the L4 just because it's a poor design. I didn't even know it was fractured for a while. Kneecaps are terrible. Chronic headaches, like all these things. Like, my body's already falling
Since
apart.
when
Like,
do
I
our
don't want
noses make sense?
No.
The stuff runs down and we... Although if you turn it
The
up the
reason
other way,
our
we might
noses
drown.
point down, though, is because most of the things we smell tend to be on our fingers or in our hands. I won't make a comment as to what some of those smells can be, but it's on our fingers. But that's why. And if you look at the old world monkeys, I think the difference between them and new world monkeys is the direction of the nostrils. Because most apes, in particular, sniff things that are, in their hands or on their fingers, particularly for food, or if we want to figure out whether things are safe or not. We don't need to smell long distances. We just want to smell what's in front of us to make sure it doesn't smell like it's going to kill us.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
It does. Again, this is not how you would
goes-
design a
because-
human,
No,
Yeah.
but
this
it's
is-
sufficient.
Yeah, and that's
Yep.
all it is. It's evolution doesn't even. I mean, as Matt and I discussed the other week with Tessa about alien life, evolution doesn't even tend towards intelligence. There's no benefit to evolution of bringing out
Clearly.
an intelligent species. Yeah, clearly.
I'm still waiting for it.
I'm thinking evolving intelligent species might turn out to be an evolutionary dead end.
Well, when we reach that dead end, I'll let you know. I see it came full circle back around to the Monty Python quote.
did.
You better pray there's intelligent life somewhere out in space because there is bugger all down here on Earth.
Yeah,
Do you reckon you get copyright claimed if you played just that clip?
probably.
The small box? Oh,
Could do it ourselves though. Monty Python don't mind other people doing it.
yeah.
Have to record one at some point. It'd be fun. Get a group of us on. Get a group of us who like doing science communication to do the song.
Good old Eric Idle.
Yeah, that's good.
Have you seen Meaning of Life, Jade, or any of the Monty Python stuff? Oh,
You should.
I would, if you were going to watch any of them, either Life of Brian or Holy Grail, particularly now that you're not religious anymore, probably Life of Brian.
Life of Brian
It's
is
pretty
good.
much a parody on Jesus.
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
much. It is a parody.
I have a lot of fun watching stuff that makes fun of religion now. It's absolutely entertaining. to me.
Hopefully, I think my favorite scene from that is still the stoning scene. They're trying to stone a guy because he said the word Jehovah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'll have to.
And just
I'll
the
have
way
to
they go,
look up.
and because the women weren't allowed to attend, all the people attending are actually women dressed up as men. But the
With
way
beards,
Monty
fake
Python
beards.
does it, they get men who pretend to be women, who act as women pretending to be men. Just because they like messing with it, and then there's one or two actual women in the crowd, but most of them are like, they're all guys playing women pretending. I just love how Monty Python's just like,
That's hilarious.
screw any gender roles, we're gonna mess with it. They have a lot of their lead female roles are men. I like Life of Brian. That's definitely the case. Brian's mum is a good example.
I'll
He's
have
not
to
the
start
Messiah, he's
watching
just a very
this.
naughty boy. Now go home. Piss off the lot of you.
You're all individuals. Yes, we are all individuals. I'm not. Sorry.
He gave me a sore
So,
foot. He
Jen.
gave me a sore foot too.
So, Jen,
Yep.
what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
African or European?
I don't know. Sorry, that.
It's from a Holy Grail.
I figured it was.
We'll stop quoting that. I want to say a big thank you to Jade for joining us again. This has been a lot of fun for Matt and I, and I think you've had a lot of fun too.
Oh, absolutely. I enjoy listening to you two talk a lot, and I learn a lot, even if it's like some of the things I didn't even realize I had an incorrect understanding on until today.
Oh, that's brilliant. Oh, I'm glad we were able to help. And I hope we were able to help people, or at least entertain the people in the chat, because this has been fun for us too. It's a bit outside of the comfort zone for both Matt and I, for some of it anyway. Well, as you can tell, because we were stumbling over it. If you want, anybody who wants to know more about evolution, Aaron Ra, Gutsit Gibbon, there's quite a few people within the community who are YouTubers who make some absolutely brilliant content if you just want to watch stuff. They are brilliant. Hopefully in the future, Matt and I will have Gutsit Gibbon on here to have a chat with her. Because then we'd actually have somebody who knows what she's talking about.
Well, you guys did a great job. Thank you so
you.
much. I know it was a little out of your guys' comfort zone, so I appreciate you talking to me about it.
Hey, I got to talk about dinosaurs.
That was what Matt was going on about earlier. He's going, it'll be good. I can talk about dinosaurs. No, any excuse to talk about dinosaurs.
And all you need is an Avery, and you have your own Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
An Avery.
And they're not going to... Yes. And at least that Jurassic Park isn't going to turn around and try and kill you. Well,
Yes,
actually,
that
no,
would
I
be a
lie.
good
If you
thing.
have magpies, they're going to try and kill you. But you can befriend magpies. I don't know if you could befriend.
I don't
befriend
know
a
what
T-Rex.
still means here. Do more giraffes.
Maybe Still can explain himself.
Yeah. Love you still. Alright, so again, Jade, thank you for joining us again. It's been amazing as always.
Yes.
To my wonderful host, Matt, thank you. Couldn't run this show properly without you. It's always a pleasure to work with you.
You need
Great.
someone else to waffle on with.
Yeah, you're good at it too, which is amazing.
As I said, you give me a topic I like and I will talk for hours.
Yeah. And to everyone in the chat, especially people who've stuck out with it for the whole show, you guys are amazing. I love you all very much, and thank you for joining us. If you haven't liked the video, please give a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I know there's been a few people in there who I haven't seen before, so please subscribe if you aren't already subscribed. And in case you're wondering, I've got a Patreon, and yeah, as you can see, there's a Patreon. But the links are down below in the description for everybody, including for the Patreon for the channel. That just helps with financing a few odds and sods for helping out with the channel. I don't expect to make lots of money, or I don't expect to make any money from YouTube. It's but I'd like to be able to provide nice content for you guys and things that look cool and are at least interesting to watch. So anytime somebody can help out, that is absolutely awesome. Next week, I'm not sure what Matt and I are covering next week. Oh, no, I think we will go with... Matt had a really good idea earlier, so go, Matt. Tell people what we're going to be doing next week.
Oh, yes, and this will also mean that everybody watching can get involved.
Get enjoyed, yeah.
But we're going to run a trivia night. I'll do my best to put some questions together that will be mainly science focused, though there'll be a few other curveballs in there. Sorry again, just that you bring up Stool's comment. But yes, we're going to hopefully do a trivia night. I'm assuming we can run Kahoot, which means everybody watching can also join in as long as you're there at the beginning.
Yeah.
So we might have to start the stream and talk for a little bit for people to join up. But yeah, hopefully we can run a nice trivia and
yeah, we're going to run have a bit of fun, run a bit of trivia. I think we'll set up a question thing in the middle. Jade, if you'd like to join us again next week, we'd love to have you again, and you can be part of the panel and help us decide who wins and if they're getting the good.
Oh, if you use Kahoot, it'll score for us.
Oh, that's right, it will. So yeah, we can.
But it also means that if you only need one of us to read out the trivia. So if I'm making the questions, you two can also have a go at it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that
I'll have
sounds
to
like
keep
fun.
the questions. I'll have to keep the questions to myself then.
Yes, you will.
I got to modify some of the ones I've got in mind, but I'm sure I can come up with a nice list.
So look forward to some fun next week with a bit of a trivia question night or science trivia question night on Schrodinger's Bathtub. So we will
Until
teach
next...
you through the power quiz.
Yes. And all I was going to say is also, as I normally do, until next time, be like a proton, stay positive, and that may involve not choking on a selfie stick.
Well done, Matt. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Bye.